I'm Lenna Hovanessian for ANCA here in Washington, D.C. with human rights lawyer Siranush Sahakyan from Armenia, who is representing Armenian prisoners of war and their families in the European Court of Human Rights. She's here on a special mission with the ANCA as an honored guest to raise awareness in the halls of Congress and to inspire Armenian advocates across the United States with her amazing work in human rights. We're honored to have Siranush here today. She gives a voice to the voiceless, she protects the unprotected, and she's truly a soldier for human rights in every aspect of her work. This meeting coincides with the September 13th attack on the sovereign territory of Armenia by Azerbaijan. And there have been more additional prisoners of war taken into captivity by Azerbaijan at this time, which is a major occupation of Siranush, and she has taken on this responsibility from the beginning. We are truly honored to have her, and additionally, there have been particularly heinous atrocities against female prisoners of war, which have come to the attention of our community and Siranush. These families are seeking help, and she is the one who is helping them. Siranush, we welcome you. We're truly honored to have you here today and for this special mission to raise awareness for our community, for our people in Armenia, our homeland, who really deserve this type of attention, and for the world to understand the types of human rights that are being violated today. Not 100 years ago, but today in the world, that should not be tolerated. We would like to know, I think our audience would love to know, how did you begin your journey, and what was the impetus or the case that you knew the moment that this is what your calling was and this is what you wanted to do?
So basically this was many years ago. I started my mission in protecting human rights 15 years ago. At that time I was very young and basically with not an interest in human rights area. So at that time, like international private law, commercial law was more attractive to young lawyers with more prospects in terms of earning. But during my university years, I heard about a case which showed how we Armenians are unprotected from Azerbaijani and Turkish aggression, from their war crimes that were committed in past but have their continuation also in a present day, where there are many international organizations dedicated to human rights, rule of law and democracy. So this happened in Hungary when Armenian officer Gurgen Markaryan was invited together with other officers from the region to participate in a peace conference under NATO. And during this conference, Azerbaijani officer attacked, and by the way, attacked in a way to deprive of also the possibility of self-defense. So this was a well-planned crime which was committed in a mid-time when Armenian brave officer was sleeping. And the severe method of killing was used, murder, namely execution by axe. And he also attacked the second Armenian officer, another participant of the event, but luckily there was an intervention by the police, and they saved the life of the second Armenian. So justice was administered in Hungary, and there was a sentence for for the perpetrator, life imprisonment, and Hungarian courts considered the severity of the crime and these special terrifying methods employed by the perpetrator.
And just to clarify, that was through decapitation?
Yes, this was through decapitation. And 7 years the criminal served sentence in Hungary, but for Azeris this action was a heroic action. So many Azeris they glorified the murder of Armenian in Hungary, and Azerbaijani government was supportive to this crime. So this was not a crime initiated, organized, planned at the individual level, but this was state-supported, state-led crime. And eventually, back in 2010-11, they were successful in achieving the extradition of Safarov to Azerbaijan. And by the way, this was conditioned with economic investments in the economy of Hungary by Azeris, and also a big crop deal with political leaders. And by acting against human rights law, they transferred Safarov to Azerbaijan, clearly knowing that he will enjoy impunity. And upon his arrival, he was pardoned by the decree of Aliyev. He was glorified, he received salaries, houses, his military rank was increased, and they opened also a page at the official website of the president asking citizens, society to welcome their hero, to congratulate for the committed death, and so on. So at this point, of course, there were some soft condemnations internationally, especially given the context where it happened. So it happened under a NATO peace conference. But no real effort was taken to ensure that Safarov and Aliyev will be punished for their committed crimes, or at least prevent recurrence of such crimes. So at that point, I felt myself responsible for the incident. The human rights law was not so advanced to protect victims where the perpetrators enjoy impunity through pardon. Very discretionary power without involvement of judiciary. So I felt that this could be a strategic litigation developing, advancing human rights law, and we as Armenians can contribute to human rights standards. But second and more important reason for us, for me personally, was to have acknowledgement of violation, to have identification of perpetrators, and pressure on measures to execute the life imprisonment against Safarov and take actions to eliminate discrimination against Armenians. So to have, to enhance, to strengthen protection of Armenians internationally from Azerbaijani Armenophobic policy discrimination. So I contacted the family, and by the way, many human rights lawyers and so on, they were also trying to identify ways, but no practical steps were offered. And then we cooperated and we litigated on this case. So I represented the family, and in 2020 we won the case. And this is the first international case where there is a acknowledgement of war crime, right to life deprivation done by Azerbaijani authorities, there is a clear indication that the crime is attributable to Aliyev. And this is the first case when the court found that this racial discrimination is not case-by-case basis, but it's a policy at state level, state supported, so this is a line of policy rather an instantaneous act. And of course after that we took other important cases where Armenians were tortured, abducted or died as a result of borderline incidents, and from that time I start documenting each and every human rights violation which is happening against Armenians by Azerbaijani or Turkish authorities.
So since that incident, what was the next major incident that occurred after that? Was it in 2016 or were there anything in between? Or was 2016 the marker? And then of course we know about the 2020 war and the big majority of captives that were taken at that time. And I understand that you have 350 cases that you have filed to be prosecuted. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me a little bit about how Safarov was treated by the Azerbaijani government? And even though, ironically, you got a judgment in 2020, why is it that the Azerbaijani government, starting from the top, has not been has not ceased, or instead has actually escalated this type of hate crime against prisoners of war that have been captured and even civilians? And today we're seeing against female officers, particularly shocking of the conscience. I mean, we can discuss some of the details of mutilation, decapitation, but what have you seen in the progression of the aggression by Azerbaijan, and then also the impunity or the lack of response from the world, that parallel?
I think we know that legal proceedings are very influential and they bound state authorities. They are legally binding with some efficient mechanism of enforcement, but they are not efficient in terms of timing. So verification of facts and these evidentiary things, they require time. But for such type of crimes, political response is also needed, which is more immediate. And I believe the key incentive for Azerbaijani authorities to continue decapitation of Armenians and the committal of large-scale war crimes against Armenians was the lack of political response. And we see clearly this increase. So in 2016 we have the second war, 4 days April war, and during this war we documented 3 decapitation cases. And in case of 2, they decapitated a person alive, and in case of the third, they mutilated the body by beheading after the death. But more importantly, they took the heads as trophy and they displayed in presence of civilian population, including the kids. And again, the perpetrator of the beheadings was promoted by Azerbaijani president as a hero, because they killed Armenian. And as a sign of trophy, they took also the head as a proof of their heroism. And 2020, we had the judgment. But at that moment, they already planned and instigated a new aggression against Artsakh and Armenia, and lack of punishments and this total impunity again incentivized Azerbaijani soldiers to commit war crimes, included in the form of decapitation. And from this 2020 war, we were able to document at least 30 decapitation cases. And in this time, the victims were not only from military, as in previous incidents, but also civilians. And civilians with some vulnerability, including the age, for example, elderly people. So
yes.
This is a very obvious case situation, which shows how an inadequate political response by key players can escalate the situation and give growth or birth to new large-scale crimes against different nations.
Yes. Would you say also that when these videos were posted on social media, and I understood they were actually sent through the phones, through the phone of, let's say, the soldier, the POW, to the families, in order not only to demonstrate to the family the torture, the mutilation, the psychological torture to the family, but also disseminated on social media? Were the soldiers, the Azeri soldiers or military, were they hiding their faces in any of these videos, or were they unashamed? What was the attitude of the Azerbaijani military soldiers on the social media, and how was that treated in Azerbaijan?
In majority video materials, their faces are open and they are clearly visible, and they filmed the committal of crime and they disseminated this information in social media in order to gain also psychological advantage of Armenian nation. And maybe in some other conflicts such crimes happened, but all political leaders, they fear from persecution, from sanctioning on their own country. So they try to hide, to conceal the traces of crime. But Azerbaijani authorities are acting openly, without any fear, because all their past crimes remained unpunished, and there was conflict between democracy and autocracy, human rights considerations and energy deals, and they felt how international community is blind and all decisions are made based on economic, political considerations. There are no value-based real decision-making internationally. And by understanding this situation, they took advantage, and yes, they even did not put efforts in order to hide their own perpetrators. So the perpetrators are seen in verifiable videos, and I would say the intelligence services of many countries possess information about the perpetrators. Just the question would be how they are interested to punish those perpetrators and bring to justice in order to prevent recurrence of such crimes against Armenians, but also in other parts of the world.
Absolutely. And before we get into the details of how many prisoners of war remain, I wanted to ask you this very important question as a matter of world policy and human rights. what is the effect of not ceasing or showing Azerbaijan or any country that it's unacceptable in the standard of human rights of the world and humanity? What does it mean for the world when you let an aggressor, an autocrat like this, that shows this type of shocking and internationally prohibited behavior, and allow them to continue because maybe they happen to have a gas deal with Europe or other interests? Are we going to pick and choose which race or religion gets allowed to be butchered by a larger country with bigger resources? Or what do you think the ramifications are as far as world morality, history, and just the order of the world?
So I think by tolerating aggression of Azerbaijan, they expose the weaknesses of international community towards other aggressive states, and they show how unprotected is international order. This and law without power is nothing. So by understanding the vulnerability of international community in protecting international legal order, we receive more aggressors. So we create new aggressors in the world, and I think there is a correlation between aggression against Artsakh and the developments in Ukraine. If the world was responsive and efficient, adequate in terms of aggression of Azerbaijan against Artsakh and Armenians, I believe the decision making would have been different in Russian authorities while starting the war against Ukraine. But they have seen how unfair is the world and how selective is the condemnation and how unprotected is the international order, and they took advantage of this chaotic situation in the world and tried to solve their issues with the same means as was employed by Azerbaijani authorities. So this is how new aggressors are being created, and they create more challenges to the world.
Yes, it's a double standard of justice and application of that justice, absolutely. And we're creating monsters even after the 2020 war, as we're seeing, and not only with Azerbaijan, but other countries and aggressors and autocracies who are making good on the concept that might makes right. And if there are no ramifications or repercussions for their actions, although in the case of Ukraine, we're seeing worldwide sanctions and support through other, ammunitions and other multi-billion dollars of support. So it is difficult to understand or to accept why there is a double standard as far as humanitarian aid and other aid to countries, especially small countries that are being attacked. But of course, that's a broader question. Can you explain to me how many prisoners of war and civilians you've taken? I mentioned that you had filed 350 cases, and how they were captured. You don't have to describe all of them, but in particular cases, what were the circumstances that led to the capture of these soldiers and how they were surrounded and had to basically go into captivity versus being able to fight or escape?
So we have cases where soldiers found themselves encircled by Azerbaijani troops, and there was no possibility to bypass Azerbaijani troops, and there was no further supply of weapon, food, and so on, and so no other possibility than being captured So there was no situation for a meaningful fight against Azeris. But we know also captivity cases which happened in forests when soldiers were hiding, especially these new conscripts which were not familiar with the surrounding location and not well trained. So we know many cases where just 18 years old with 1 month's service in army appeared in most acute points of the war, and to save their lives they try to hide in the forests, and then again after the trilateral statement some special operations were conducted in forests to identify those people, and we even know cases when this group was identified but not taken into captivity but was killed in the forests while they were under international humanitarian law protection. So basically, these were the two main circumstances of captivity. And about the data,
how many were taken, and then how many remain, or how many were repatriated, and then how many do you think remain in captivity?
As to this date, 156 captives were released and repatriated to Armenia. But apart from that, we have acknowledged a group of captives, which is 33, who are still in Baku, and they are visited by ICRC, and they maintain contacts with their families. So they are in a more safe condition because internationally their captivity in Baku is known to the world and also acknowledged by Azerbaijani authorities. But apart from these 33, we have verified credible information about captivity of at least 80 captives, mainly prisoners of war, which were held in Baku, and they were under the control of Azerbaijani soldiers, and alive without any resisting actions, but Azerbaijan fails to acknowledge their captivity, and now they have the status of enforced disappeared person, and we also brought cases about this group. They are different from the group of missing persons, because in case of missing persons there is a possibility of death. The search operations are not efficient to identify their corpses, which are still in field. But in case of for disappeared people, we have credible information and evidence proving that they were captives in Azerbaijan.
Right. Of the 156 you mentioned that were repatriated, as far as we know what was on social media for the Azerbaijani military. We all saw the military trophy museum, which was state-sponsored and proudly displayed by Aliyev for all the world to see, without any fear of impunity or repercussions, except for what happened in the international ICJ court. I wanted to know what evidence, once you authenticated the videos or the photos that you received, what evidence did you see on the victims of violence or other racial or religious-based hate crime and violence against the victims that you got? What were the stories you got from the 156 that you were able to repatriate, and what other evidence did you see on the bodies that you received of those who did not survive after the torture and horrific acts which are documented by Siranush and her team and currently in the European Court of Human Rights? What did you observe that tells us from that point that this is what was going on?
In case of repatriated captives, we still pursue their cases. So release was just one small part of these legal proceedings, but within the legal proceedings we cover many other issues. So the remaining issues are connected to treatment while being held in Azerbaijan, starting from conditions, living conditions, hygiene, food, and also treatments, medical assistance, not being subjected to inhuman, degrading treatment or punishment, and also some guarantees from torturing. And all repatriated captives, they gave very detailed and verifiable information about torture and ill treatment. So we have well-founded cases about this torture. Apart from that, we raised the issue of violation of right to liberty. Many POWs were released a year after, a year and a half, or 6 months after, but there was an obligation on Azerbaijan to release them immediately after cessation of hostilities. And after this trilateral statement, again, they reiterated the need of immediate release of all captives and detained persons. Despite the Armenian side returned all Azerbaijani prisoners of war, Azerbaijan, as to this date, fails to release all prisoners of war, and we have proof that they are kept as hostages in order to pressure Armenian government and also internationals to receive more concessions on issues in the political agenda. So basically they are unlawfully, they were and some are still deprived of their liberty unlawfully. So right to liberty issue is very important to protect them from arbitrary detentions. In all cases, we raise this violation of the right to be free from discrimination, and they were discriminated because of their nationality and ethnicity, and more unaccepted forms of human rights violations happened because of their identity, not because there is a standard of treating prisoners of war generally, but because it was linked to Armenians. So Azerbaijani authorities put in more effort to increase this anxiety, stress from Armenian side. And depending on cases, we also raise the issue of violation of freedom of expression. In many videos, you can see that Armenian soldiers are forced to repeat expressions from Azerbaijani soldiers, including Qarabakh is Azerbaijan. This is against the convictions of any Armenian, and especially our soldiers, but they were forced to repeat those expressions, or they were forced to curse Armenian symbols, Armenian authorities. They were forced to kiss Azerbaijani flag, and here we have protection of their freedom of expression, and we have also cases where they attacked against religion by removing crosses, or by giving them a Quran to read, or giving them like books about Armenian terrorists and so on. So we raise also the violations connected to freedom of conscience and religion. And in many cases, the videos, the dissemination of videos intervened with their right to privacy. Depending on the context, we have also issues connected to the right to privacy.
Yes. Well, these were also tortures or torments, mutilation actions that were simultaneous with Aliyev and high-level officials making statements that were anti-Armenian, hate-based, about ethnic cleansing, and about finishing the mission of their forefathers, as stated by President Erdogan, and corresponding statements by Aliyev. And so there appears to be, if you look at all angles of it, state-sponsored hate executed through lower-level military officials on behalf of the state, and constant reinforcement, and then furthermore, international lack of response creates the type of horrific things that we've seen. And I want to highlight that in the last few days, these, I don't know if we've reached the peak of atrocity and shocking of the conscience of any human being, is the treatment of female soldiers, quite a few recently of female soldiers in the last few days. And these families have contacted you for assistance. But, you know, as far as you feel comfortable, can you share how these female soldiers have been treated, so that our viewers can understand that what happens when you don't respond appropriately to this type of genocidal, hate-based behavior?
As I already mentioned from the previous war, 2016, we had cases of decapitations, but also cases of mutilation of dead bodies of male soldiers, by cutting the ears, by cutting the heads, and also taking this as a wealth to their societies. And we have seen the same handwriting for this conflict, and also new colors concerning the female, and from this war we know that already 4 females were deceased, died because of the hostilities, and in case of 2, we have seen mutilation of body, or also some conduct which is humiliating, and it's also gender-based, and we have seen also cutting finger, putting on the mouth, and so on. And again, they filmed this information, they disseminated, and by the way, they also identified the families of female soldiers, deceased female soldiers, and sent those video materials directly to the families, or in the comments area they posted the photos from these videos in their social media pages, for example on the Facebook account or Instagram account, where people express their condolences concerning to the family families about the death, also remembered the deaths, about the deceased female, sharing some positive photos and so on. In the comments part, they post this humiliating scenes of bodies, mutilation, and also offensive words, cursing, and so on.
I have to say that I don't know who can handle such a difficult job. You are very courageous. We are very honored to have you. And my last question to you, unless you had more to add, is you mentioned in one of your talks that your response to pain and suffering is action. And I ascribe to the same motto in my life, and it makes me so proud to have somebody like you, a fellow attorney, a compatriot in Armenia, fighting this kind of battle that, can be a very difficult job. And you see the lowest levels of human depravity and suffering of our people, which must be very difficult to take. And so I wanted to know, what is it that drives you? What's your passion? What drives you to do this type of very difficult work?
So the first, when any war crimes happens to any Armenian in the world, I feel myself victimized, because this is an ethnic-based crime, and they are not related to the personalities or previous relations between victim or the perpetrator, but they relate to the ethnicity of the victim. And I belong to Armenian ethnicity. So each time I hear about grave human rights violation by Azeris against Armenia, by Turks against Armenians, I feel myself victimized. And of course, I see that we are not secured in this world, this area, in any part of the world. So, of course, the psychology of victim is not a good one, and it mostly causes negative emotions. But by living those emotions, I convert and receive more strength to make difference. So my motivation to change something, not to have this unprotected situation, is a huge, great driving source, energy. But apart from that, I interact very intensively with the families. So I know their situation, I know their hopes, and also I have seen successful stories where we help the families, and we lived all this path together. So, for example, I can bring one case when, the family approached me, and together we're doing fact-finding. We're not aware whether the soldier was dead or a captive, and I live this uncertainty together with family and their feelings and their fears from hearing any news about the death of a soldier. And then at some point we were able to prove the captivity, but again some other uncertainty, whether he's still alive in Azerbaijan, what type of treatment will he survive all this? And then we took our action. So these international measures gave some protection. Then we received the official acknowledgement. But then again, when will be the release? And I think the joyful moment was that we received the news that he's already in Armenia, and next day the family came to our office, and also this feeling was special. So I have seen the soldier for the first time in my life. Oh. But when I saw, I thought that I knew him very well, because I had about him lots of information during this whole time. Were with the family, talking about him, studying his photos, memorizing many incidents, and my impression was that he's really someone very close to me, a relative about whom I know lots of things, and I think when we live these feelings and we change, also we make positive changes in the families, and also try to circulate this chain of kindness. I think this is another important motivation for my work, and of course source of energy.
Siranush, you are an absolute inspiration to all of us, not only as an attorney, as a female, as a compatriot. We're very proud of your work. Your compassion and dedication sets the bar very high for everybody, and you don't run from problems or issues, but you stare them in the face and you jump into the fire and you take it on, and we're very proud of your empowerment of victims and aid to victims, and for all the tremendous work that you do for our people, our community, our nation. And keep doing your work, and we're always here to support you. I'm very proud, and thank you very much.